Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys. Poland. Poland. The original link to the video top of the description if you haven't seen it yet or just want to go check it out on your own. Click on the link, send you right over there. Preemptive like. Rick Steves Europe. Poland Rediscovered. Krakow, Auschwitz, and Warsaw. So these videos are great. I've seen a good amount of them on topics and places all over Europe. They get into both history and some cultural and architectural stuff, so it's always a nice combination of a lot of different information about wherever he's visiting. So I know Poland has a great history. The more I learn about it, the more significant I realize it is to European history. And just the cities seem beautiful. I've never been. I would love to go. Let's get started, guys.
I'm Rick Steves,
Hope
back
everyone's
with
doing
more
well.
of the best of Europe. This time, we're in Poland, with such a rich history and a promising future. Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Yeah. Polish, the language, it's difficult to understand. All languages are. I don't know, but with stuff like German or French is sometimes kind of difficult. Spanish, Nordic languages, at least the letters tend to have the same pronunciation, usually. But whenever I try to read, or I like to sometimes go into Google Translate and just see what certain... I'm weird, okay? I like just looking up random stuff for languages. And just your letters are not intuitive to me as an English speaker. Very confusing. Stay hydrated, guys. Drink some water. Whatever.
Every country's had its ups and downs, but Poland's been particularly hard hit through the ages. Thankfully, these are good times for Poland. It's a member of the European Union, its economy is thriving, and it's never been more fun to visit. Poland's two must-see cities are Warsaw and Krakow.
Enjoying the highlights of Poland, we'll visit its grand cultural center,
So open
Krakow.
and beautiful.
Make a pilgrimage to Poland's holiest site. Remember the horrors of Auschwitz. Descend into a magical salt mine.
Birkenau, right, is another
Feel the jazzy beat.
concentration
Be
camp in
inspired
Poland.
by World War II heroics. Slam down a Polish tradition.
Whoa, yeah.
And experience the Phoenix of Europe, Warsaw. In the northeast corner of Europe, Poland is one of the largest countries on the continent. We'll visit its historic capital, Krakow, side trip to a salt mine, and to a concentration camp. Then
Sorry, guys. Look how big Romania is. I usually think of like Spain, France, Germany, Poland. I guess Italy as well as big European mainland countries. Romania is pretty large.
Poland is one of the largest countries on the continent. We'll visit its historic capital, Krakow, side trip to a salt mine, and to a concentration camp. Then head for Poland's modern capital, Warsaw.
Yup.
We start in Krakow. It's like the Boston of Poland, a charming and vital city, buzzing with history, college students, and tourists.
Awesome.
Even
It's
though
like where
Poland's
I am.
political capital moved from here to Warsaw 400 years ago, Krakow remains the country's cultural and intellectual center.
The city's history is rich, its sights are fascinating, and the prices are some of Europe's lowest. This is a country where the most expensive cafe on the most expensive perch serves drinks for a fraction of what you'd expect. The charm of today's Krakow lies in its medieval roots.
Krakow grew wealthy from trade in the 12th century. Traders passing through were required to stop for a few days and sell their goods
What was that thing? The Hanseatic League?
at a discount. Traders passing through were required to stop for a few days and sell their goods at a discount. Local merchants then resold their wares at a profit, and the city thrived.
In the 13th century, the Tartars, aka the Mongols, swept in from Asia and destroyed Krakow. Resilient Krakowians took this opportunity to rebuild their city with a near-perfect grid plan, a striking contrast to the narrow, maze-like lanes of most medieval towns.
What's our excuse then? Because our cities are very grid-like, but they don't look this good.
Contrast to the narrow, maze-like lanes of most medieval towns.
Eventually, Krakow's power waned. Warsaw emerged as the dominant city in Poland, and Krakow became a provincial backwater of the Habsburg Empire ruled from Vienna. While Warsaw was in the sphere of Moscow and therefore more eastern and conservative, Krakow has long been more western and liberal.
Krakow emerged from World War II virtually unscathed. It slumbered under communism until Poland won its freedom in 1989. Today, the city is Poland's leading tourist attraction, with plenty of top-notch sights. After the Tartars destroyed their city, Krakowians built this imposing wall. The big, round defensive fort standing outside the wall is a barbican. It provided extra protection at the town's main gate. By the 19th century, the city wall was no longer necessary. Locals tore down most of it, filled in the moat, and planted trees. Today, this delightful and people-friendly greenbelt, a park called the Planty, circles Krakow's old town. To get away from the tourists' Krakow, bike or hike around the Planty and up the park that lines the Vistula River. If you think you're good at chess, challenge one of these guys. Nearby, the imposing St. Mary's Church, with its soaring lookout tower, has long been an icon of the city. Each midday, crowds gather for a medieval moment as a nun swings open the church's much-adored altarpiece. This exquisite Gothic polyptych and
sensory overload. The more you focus on one area, the more detailed you realize it all is.
Adored altarpiece. This exquisite Gothic polyptych, an altarpiece with pivoting panels, was carved in the late 1400s by Veit Stosch. One of the most impressive medieval wood carvings in existence, it depicts the death of the Virgin with emotion rare in Gothic art. St. Mary's Church faces Krakow's marvelous market square. One of Europe's most gasp-worthy public spaces, it bustles with life.
I realize that, if you can't, you'll be able to tell I was never a very religious person. Religion is awesome and filled with history and you know, there are a lot of great things, and I love architecture, and you can't separate, you know, religion, Christianity from you know, Western history. But I didn't know that. So Mary Magdalene and Mary, Jesus's mother, were two different people. I didn't know that until like 3 weeks ago.
This square
is that correct?
Gasp-worthy public spaces, it bustles with life. This square is where Krakow lives. Kids practice breakdancing, horse carriages take you for a ride, and folk bands add traditional color. When built in the 13th century, this was the biggest square in medieval Europe. Back then, you couldn't just sell things anywhere. Everything had to be sold here, on the market square, or in the cloth hall. In the Middle Ages, this was where the cloth sellers had their market stalls. Today, whether you're looking for a fancy egg, some traditional embroidery, or a little amber, it's your one-stop souvenirs shopping arcade.
Is amber sap, like fossilized sap? I'm asking too many questions. Okay, sorry. I don't know.
I find Polish culture and history both compelling and confusing. My friend and fellow tour guide, Kasia Derlicka, is joining us to be sure we get things just right.
Let's go to to a very special place. It is close to every Polish heart. It's Wawel, and Poland actually begins in Wawel.
Wawel Hill is sacred ground to the Polish people, a symbol of Polish royalty and independence. A castle has stood here since the 11th century. Today, Wawel is the most visited site in all Poland. The highlight of the
11th century. Just, I say this a lot in other videos, like a lot of stuff when I watch about England or the UK. So maybe you guys haven't heard me say it on a Poland video, but over here, 1800 something is like, whoa, that is old, right? And 1700, insane. 1600, over here, it's like not that big of a deal. This is 11th centuries, 1000s.
The entire castle complex is the cathedral. Wawel Cathedral is
Sorry, I wanted to make sure to rewind when I pause.
a castle has stood here since the 11th century. Today, Wawel is the most visited site in all Poland. The highlight of the entire castle complex is the cathedral. Wawel Cathedral is Poland's national church. It's Westminster Abbey. To Poles, this church is the national mausoleum. It holds the tombs of Poland's greatest rulers and historic figures. Poland is devoutly Catholic. 75% of its nearly 40 million people are practicing Catholics. Pope John Paul II was a hometown boy and served right here as Archbishop of Kraków before being called to Rome. Catholicism defines the Poles, holding them together when nothing else could.
Imagine, Poland was crunched between Protestant Germany and Orthodox Russia. During the partition in the 19th century, we didn't even show on the map, but we survived, thanks to being Polish and thanks to being Catholics. And during communism, it was also very difficult and very dark, but we expressed our freedom and our political dissent by going to Mass.
Shows you how important keeping your culture and your identity is, even when you are suppressed and taken over or defeated in battle, you know, taken over in some way, that unless they stamp that out, you can always revive in the future and remain Polish or remain, X culture, whatever. And it's surprising because I thought that, well, she's explaining it right now, that the Soviets were famously atheist and pretty staunchly, I guess they didn't want anything competing with their loyalty to the state, or I don't know the reason exactly. But the fact that Poland went through all of that, a lot of stuff in addition to that, and stayed Polish is amazing.
Compared to the rest of Europe,
Sorry, I
Polish
explained
churches
that
are
bad.
alive with people practicing their faith. Respectful tourists are welcome. Some come to worship, and others to remember leading figures in Polish history.
I'm not saying that, I'm saying Soviet control. I'm not necessarily part of the Soviet Union.
Such as Kazimierz the Great.
If you're going to remember one Polish king, remember Kazimierz the Great, who ruled Poland from Kraków in the 14th century. Kazimierz was one of those larger-than-life medieval kings who left his mark on all fronts. He was a great warrior, diplomat, patron of the arts, and womanizer.
His scribes bragged Kazimierz found Poland made of wood and left it made of brick and stone. He even made it onto the 50 zloty note.
Most of all, Kazimierz was remembered for being a tolerant and progressive king. In the 14th century, when other nations were deporting Jews, King Kazimierz actively welcomed them. He granted them special banking and trading privileges and established the long-standing tradition of Poland being a safe haven for Jews in Europe.
I just want to clarify something I said about, being surprised that Poland is, remaining pretty Catholic, religious, despite being going through the Cold War. Because I've seen a map and a video about post-war Germany, where even to this day, in what used to be the borders of East Germany, now it's United Germany, but even nowadays in that area, there is much more atheism in that area. And so since Poland is east of East Germany, I sort of expected it to have a similar effect, but it didn't, clearly.
The
neighboring tradition of Poland being a safe haven for Jews in Europe.
All right, just want to clarify
The
that.
neighborhood of Kazimierz, named for the king, was a thriving and autonomous Jewish community for centuries when most of the world's Jews lived here in Poland. In the 1930s, a quarter of Krakow's population was Jewish. While few Jews actually still live here, the spirit of the Jewish tradition survives. Perhaps the best way to enjoy that is at a klezmer dinner concert. Several restaurants offer Jewish music from 19th century Poland with their traditional cuisine. As Polish and Jewish culture mingled here for so many centuries, it's hard to distinguish between Jewish and Polish cuisine. But with ambience like this, it's clear the Jewish heritage here is a rich one.
I feel like I'm pausing too much, but whatever, just fast forward if you want. Why is it so strange to me seeing potatoes served in this way when it shouldn't be that strange to me? You know, potatoes are eaten everywhere. I love potatoes. Of course, they're eaten in the U.S. as well as in Poland. But they're usually either, you know, a baked potato, which is, you know, in the skin of the potato and then put in the oven, or it's mashed potatoes, obviously mashed potatoes, or like home fries or something. But skinning the potatoes and then boiling them and then serving them whole, it seems so foreign to me, but it's not a big difference. And I see this in a lot of European cuisine, mainly Germanic, Nordic, Polish, kind of just Baltic, just Baltic areas, it's serving potatoes like this. And I don't know why it's so strange to me, but I noticed that.
But with ambience like this, it's clear the Jewish heritage here is a rich one.
While Poles and Jews managed to live together relatively well, the story became a nightmare with the rise of Nazism in the 1930s. This thriving Jewish community, like most in Europe, was decimated during the Holocaust.
The fragile remains of the community, historic exhibits, and its synagogues provide a meditative look at how the town was walled in and its residents eventually shipped off to nearby concentration camps. Ultimately, less than 10% of Krakow's Jews survived the war and the death camps. The Jewish cemeteries of Kazimierz were defiled by the Germans, bulldozed by Nazi tanks. Headstones broken under tank treads now create a moving mosaic wall and Holocaust monument.
But the most powerful Holocaust memorial, I think, in all of Europe is the concentration camp here at Auschwitz.
I've been to Dachau concentration camp outside of Munich, Germany, and it was a crazy experience. But I know that Auschwitz and Birkenau, I believe, is the other one. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anything I'm saying historically about Poland, guys, I'm sorry if it comes across misinformed or whatnot. Please correct me down below in the comments. But I guess Auschwitz and Birkenau were on a whole other level of mass murder and destruction than something even like Dachau was. So, although I've been to a concentration camp, I guess you can't compare to, you know, concentration camps.
An hour's
like
drive
this.
from Krakow.
Auschwitz was the biggest and most notorious concentration camp in the Nazi system. Seeing the camp can be difficult, but Auschwitz victims and their families want tourists to come here to experience the scale and the monstrosity of the place in human terms, in hope that the Holocaust will never be forgotten. The Nazis turned this army base into a death camp. They murdered over 4 million European Jews in Poland. Over 1 million people, the vast majority of them Jews, were systematically exterminated here at Auschwitz. The notorious gate welcomed inmates with a cruel lie. Arbeit macht frei. Work will set you free. Former cell blocks tell the story. People were told they'd be starting new lives and to bring luggage, clearly labeled with their names. After they were killed, everything of value was sorted and warehoused. Eyeglasses evoke how individuality was trashed.
Jesus, that... Something about seeing someone's personal clothing items just knowing, like, a head was in every one of... Or one of these belonged to, you know what I'm trying to say. It's crazy.
Crutches and prosthetic limbs remind us that the first people exterminated were mentally and physically ill German citizens. Children's clothing. The Nazis spared no one. And a seemingly endless mountain of shoes. It's hard to comprehend the numbers. Halls are lined with photographs of victims, each marked with the dates of arrival and dates of death. Inmates rarely survived more than a couple of months. The crematorium is marked by its chimney. Up to 700 people at a time could be gassed, but it required 2 days to burn that many bodies here. The Nazis didn't like this inefficiency, so they built a far bigger camp 2 miles away. Auschwitz II, or Birkenau, was a vast factory of death holding 100,000 people. A few buildings survive. Train tracks led efficiently past the main building, into the camp, and to the dividing platform.
A Nazi doctor stood here and evaluated each prisoner as they stepped off the train. If he pointed to the right, the prisoner marched unknowingly directly to the gas chamber. If he pointed to the left, the person was judged strong enough to work and would live a little longer. It was here that families from all over Europe were torn apart forever.
Up to 1,000 were packed into each of these buildings. Each inmate had an ID number, a barrack number, and a bed number. 2 chimneys connected by a brick duct provided a little heat.
The bricks are worn smooth by countless inmates who sat here to catch a little warmth in the middle of a bitter Polish winter. I can't imagine how cold they must have been, wet, hungry, and dressed in rags.
The Germans bombed the sprawling gassing and cremation facilities as they retreated. The ruins stand as a memorial. The gas chambers where the mass killing was done were disguised as showers. People were given numbered hooks to hang their clothes on, conned into thinking they were coming back. The Nazis didn't want a panic. Then inmates were piled into the shower room. At Birkenau, the Nazis gassed and cremated over 4,000 people per day. The camp monument represents gravestones and the chimney of a crematorium. Plaques in each of the languages spoken by camp victims explain the purpose of this memorial.
The memorial reads, "A cry of despair and a warning to humanity." Since Liberation Day in 1945, millions have visited this place. Hopefully, they take away a determination to learn from the Holocaust and never let it be repeated.
I was trying to figure out a way to phrase this, and I guess the best I can say is it's horrific to see what humans like you and I are capable of doing to other humans. And it's very, as much as you want to say, like, no, I can never do that, I'm sure a lot of them thought that too. And so, rather than just like, oh, look at what those people did and how horrific that is, which is a part of it, it should be studied and everything, but that people can do this and not just this. I'm still having trouble saying it. I think it's important to realize that this is not just a German on Polish tragedy, as it clearly was, but that humans can do that stuff. I'm wording this terribly. I think that's the best I can try and say what I'm trying to say. So it's a horrific part of Polish history, but I think it's more of a worldwide message that you and I are capable of doing horrific things in given circumstances. And as much as I don't think I could do something like that, and you don't think, and I'm sure they thought that too, the people who carried this stuff out. But given scenarios that or whatever. Clearly, it's capable of happening, and that's terrifying, and should never be forgotten for sure. All right, I think I said that as best as I could. Let's get back to it.
Driving through the countryside back to Krakow refreshes travelers with a look at today's peaceful rural Poland. Few travelers take time to see the countryside. Stop the car, get out. Enjoy an intimate look at Poland's welcoming country life. The small houses are traditionally used by 3 generations at the same time. 19th century houses, the few that survive, often sport colorful stripes. Back then, parents announced that their daughters were now eligible by getting out the paint. Once they saw these blue lines, village boys were welcome to come a-courtin'. The remarkable Wieliczka salt mine, just outside of Krakow, has been producing salt for 8 centuries. Today, it's busy not with miners, but with tourists.
So is it true that, like, when I think of salt, I think of, something that makes food taste better? But I guess the main reason was for food preservation rather than just seasoning, which does make sense.
After descending 200 feet below the surface, you follow your guide on a mile-long downhill stroll, getting a memorable peek at life in the mine.
I wonder what other uses it had, though.
9 levels, 1,000 feet deep, over 100 miles of tunnels. For centuries, generations of Wieliczka miners spent their daylight hours underground, rarely seeing the sun. Proud miners carved figures of great Poles out of the salt. You'll see legends from the days of King Kazimierz, when 1/3 of Poland's income came from these precious deposits. The famous astronomer Copernicus. And even the region's favorite son, Pope John Paul II.
The total number of chapels in this mine is over 20. This is the oldest chapel in this part of the salt mine, St. Anthony Chapel from 17th century. Everything here is around is made of salt, even the chandelier, salt crystal.
Oh, wow.
Visitors expect salt white, but it's black, but it's salt. If you don't trust me, you can taste it. And salt preserves everything. Take me as example. I'm 65 years old and I'm still fresh, still young.
The mine's enormous underground church, carved in the early 20th century, is still used for Mass. Everything here, including the ornate altar and the grand chandelier, is hewn from this underworld of salt. When the tour is over, a small but industrial strength lift beams you up.
This thing's moving.
Back in Krakow, cap your day in one of the town's many jazz clubs. Like much of Poland, Krakow pulses with cool jazz nightly. Back in the 1950s, Janusz Muniak was one of the original Polish hepcats. Now he owns the jazz club Muniaka and jams regularly here in a mellow cellar.
Nice vibes in there.
After a 3-hour train ride from Krakow, we arrive in Warsaw. Warsaw, pronounced Warszawa in Polish, is Poland's capital and biggest city. Its outskirts sprawl with communist-built apartment blocks. Downtown has a Gotham City ambience with busy boulevards, expansive squares, and blocky buildings. The Palace of Culture and Science, Poland's tallest building at over 700 feet, is a Warsaw landmark. It was a gift from Stalin in the 1950s that the people of Warsaw couldn't refuse.
Because it was to be Soviet in substance and Polish in style, Soviet architects actually toured Poland to absorb the local culture before starting the project.
To show their gratitude, the people of Warsaw nicknamed it Stalin's penis. And nestled in the center of all this utilitarian concrete are...
I bet he was happy to hear that, I'm sure.
Stalin's penis. And nestled in the center of all this utilitarian concrete are plenty of urban charms. Warsaw's Royal Way, a mostly buses and taxis only shop.
I'm sorry. I need to get over that for a second. That. Okay. I'm good. Continue.
Boulevard is Warsaw's Royal Way, a mostly buses and taxis only shopping boulevard, is a local favorite for strolling and browsing, and ultimately leads you to Warsaw's historic Old Town. The castle long served as a royal palace. Sigismund III, the great king who moved Poland's capital from Kraków to Warsaw in 1596, stands overseeing everything. And the city's legendary mermaid welcomes friends while keeping out foes.
The grand city of Warsaw experienced more than its share of hardships in the 20th century. As with the rest of Poland, the real tragedies came with the Nazis and World War II. During the Nazi occupation, there were two heroic uprisings. First, the Jewish ghetto uprising. Then, about a year later, the entire city rose up against the Nazis in the Warsaw Uprising.
Several powerful museums are dedicated to telling the story. By the 1930s, Warsaw, with 350,000 Jews, was one of the largest Jewish cities in the world. The Nazis arrived in 1939. They crammed Warsaw's Jews into a single neighborhood and surrounded it with a wall. As more Jewish people were moved in from the countryside, Warsaw's ghetto was soon the miserable home of well over 1 million people.
By 1942, half of the Jews in the ghetto had died of disease or starvation. The Nazis began moving people out at the rate of 5,000 a day to nearby death camps like Auschwitz. The population of the ghetto was down to about 60,000 when those who remained realized they would die even if they did nothing. They decided to stage a courageous uprising.
Hopelessly outgunned by the Nazis, the uprising was crushed. The ghetto was demolished, and its residents were killed. Because of the ferocity of Nazi hatred, nothing remains of the ghetto except the street plan and the heroic spirit of the people who once lived here. Ghetto Heroes Square, now surrounded by bland Soviet-style apartment blocks, marks the heart of what was the Jewish ghetto. The monument commemorates those who fought and died for the dignity and freedom of the Jewish nation, for a free Poland, and for the liberation of humankind.
About a year later, the rest of the city staged another ill-fated uprising, the Warsaw Uprising. By 1944, as the Soviet army drew near, it was becoming clear the Nazis' days in Warsaw were numbered. With the expectation of help from Soviet tanks which were gathering just across the river, it seemed like the right time to attack.
This monument recalls the 50,000 Polish resistance fighters, the biggest underground army in military history, who launched a surprise attack on their Nazi oppressors. They poured out of the sewers and caught the Nazis off guard, initially having great success. It was rifles, knives, and Molotov cocktails against Air Force, tanks, and artillery as they battled courageously for 63 days. But the Nazis regrouped and brutally put down the Warsaw Uprising. 250,000 Poles were killed.
Through all this, the Soviets sat here across the river. They watched and waited. As the smoke cleared and the Nazis retreated, the Red Army marched in and claimed the pile of rubble that was once Warsaw.
To me, the thriving city itself is the best memorial to those Warsaw heroes. Today, as you explore, it's hard to imagine that by 1945, nearly 2/3 of the city's pre-war population was dead and not a building was standing in Warsaw's Old Town. Virtually everything you see is rebuilt. Before the war, Warsaw's Old Town Square was one of the most happening spots in Central Europe. And today, even the higgledy-piggledy charm of the buildings has been painstakingly restored. The colorful architecture reminds locals and tourists alike of the pre-war glory of the Polish capital. The Old Town's many restaurants provide a good introduction to Polish cuisine. And central to that is vodka. Vodka, after it's chilled properly, pours thickly into the glass. We're having some traditional Polish dishes that go well with vodka. Herring, cold cuts, Polish pickles, and steak tartare.
So vodka has long been part of Polish culture?
Yeah, it's a traditional Polish drink. And actually it makes a lot of sense. In the old days, when the winters were long and very cold, we needed it. It was our warm-up. It was essential to survive this harsh climate.
Liquid jacket.
Do you know how to drink vodka?
Show me.
Okay, first of all, na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie.
Sorry, these are my favorite what am I trying to say? Say it quickly. Just being shown something that's important and a little like this is, for words, just forget. Yeah, just go. I like.
When the winters were long and very cold, we needed it. It was our warm-up. It was essential to survive this harsh climate. Do you know how to drink vodka?
Show me.
Okay, first of all, na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie.
And please don't sip it. We don't sip vodka. It's bottoms up. Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's do it. Na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie. Ooh.
Oh, strong?
Yeah. Now
You
what?
can chase it.
Chase it. Oh my! You must. Why don't you sip it? I mean, it's just like, wow.
What a question. So it hurts only once.
It hurt only once, that's for sure.
Warsaw's huge, idyllic Łazienki Park is sprinkled with neoclassical buildings, peacocks, and young Poles in love. Neoclassical buildings, peacocks,
I thought. Okay, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Aren't they like? I did not expect a peacock in Poland.
and young Poles in love. It was built in the 18th century by Poland's very last king, King Poniatowski, who wanted it both for his own summer residence, his striking palace on the water, and as a place for his citizens to relax. A monument to Frédéric Chopin, Poland's great romantic composer, graces the park's rose garden. Chopin sits under a wind-blown willow tree. He spent his last years in Paris, where he wrote most of his greatest music. But locals cherish the thought that Chopin's inspiration came from memories of wind blowing through the willow trees of his native land, Poland.
The resilience of Poland's culture and the warmth of its people inspire me. And learning from this country's recent past, I'm reminded we have much to be thankful for and much to be vigilant against. Travel engages me with our world, and it helps me feel fully alive. That's why I like it. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rick Steves. Until next time, keep on traveling.
Great video, as always. Being tossed around, like being pushed around by, you know, the Habsburgs, or having your areas occupied or pushed around, Habsburgs, Russians. And then you have the Prussians and the Austrians and the Russians all trying to divvy up stuff, you know, after the Napoleonic Wars, I'm sure other times. And then you have World War I Poland. I don't know that much about, but there had to have been some significant Eastern Front battles and World War I events that I'm not aware of. And then obviously World War II. And then you're occupied by the Soviets. And you're still here. And you're still Poland. And that is incredible. And through all this horrible stuff, it probably makes you more sturdy than almost any other country who didn't have that past. Because I bet you a Pole, more than other citizens of different countries, of other countries, appreciate their country because of what they've been through. So it's fantastic. Love Rick Steves Europe. Yeah, I would appreciate if I said anything wrong, please correct me. If you could answer any of the questions I had, I'd really appreciate it. Love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. And hopefully I'll see you guys next video. Bye, guys.